Good to see you again on our channel. With a half-emptied glass of whiskey alongside him and his Stratocaster propped up on his lap, Eric Clapton sits alone backstage. Though he can hear music in his head, the stage is now silent. Not any voices, but the voices of women torment him, restore his health while supporting him. They were the women who had an impact on his listening and playing styles. Themes of emotion have persisted throughout Clapton's career. There was always respect behind that manly arrogance, even though there were bloodied fingers, broken hearts, and sweat-soaked blues. His words are filled with wonder when he describes the women who inspired him. The 6 women who had the most impact on Slow-Ham's life are listed here. To begin, a lone voice emerged from the din like an unexpected storm. Julie Andrews. She lacked smoothness. She radiated energy. It seemed as if someone were about to burst into tears of joy when Clapton initially heard Janis sing. Nobody was afraid or used a filter. She was indifferent whether her voice wavered. If it was sharp, it didn't bother her. It has always done so. Backstage at blues festivals and strolling the streets of San Francisco, they were inseparable in the late 1600s. Janis approached Clapton and asked if he wanted to jam on a wild night at the Fillmore. Declining, he seemed anxious and amazed. One of his major regrets, he later acknowledged. They were in the Haightorsburg scene together for a number of wild nights. Once, after a party, Clapton discovered Janis on a rooftop by herself, singing softly into the fog while holding a bottle. He sat down next to her, lit a cigarette, and listened while they barely exchanged words. She sounded more genuine than anyone he had ever heard before at that very moment. His memory was flooded with the aroma of the city, together with sweat, smoke, alcohol, and the way her voice pierced through everything like a sacred and damaged instrument. When Janis sang, it was not for show. By singing, she managed to stay alive. In his eyes, Janis was more than simply a rock vocalist. She carried a bottle and an unquenchable flame of sadness as she preached the blues. The pace at which she lived was rapid, poured their hearts out on stage, and then disappeared, leaving behind just smoke, a hush, and music that reverberates. Then another voice emerged, Bonnie Raitt, with passion in her slide and soul in her quiet. Bonnie embodied Clapton's guitar and grit journey in all its female glory. He took a second look while she played slide guitar. Bolts who? He froze as soon as he heard her voice. Something about her voice brought back memories of the South for him. Dusty taverns, beat-up amplifiers, and a voice that could teach a class a thing or two about the past. I have done my best to develop them. I suppose I could be doing better if I hadn't wasted so much time, getting off my behind. It was at a Los Angeles benefit concert in the early 18th century that they actually met. Clapton, taken aback by her authority, observed her from the sidelines. Whiskey and anecdotes about their shared appreciation of the blues were the drinks of choice later that night. She had an air of complete humility about her that stunned him. As if they were old friends, she brought up Mississippi John Hurt and Murky Waterways. She was deeply rooted. They ran into one another at blues festivals and award ceremonies every now and then in the years that followed. After they arrived in New Orleans, they found themselves at the same smoke-filled pub for a late-night jam session. Even the veteran session musicians fell silent as Bonnie stepped onto the stage, plugged in, and performed Love Me Like a Man. After singing along with her for a 12-bar blues that was painfully sluggish, Clapton did little more than nod as the song concluded. It made no difference that they never recorded together. All that mattered was the words, simply respect. According to Clapton, she had her own spotlight and didn't require his. Bonnie exemplified refined taste in his eyes, understated and genuine. She took the lead instead of following the herd, with heart, talent, and nerve at her fingertips. Then along came Tina Turner, a wild woman adorned in scarlet and sequins. She excelled beyond her wildest dreams. Not only did Tina Turner's voice strike Clapton like a fist, but the narrative behind it was just as powerful. Falling, breaking, and fighting back from addiction and misery were all things he was familiar with. Tina, too, Survival was rendered musically by her. They shared the stage during a London private charity event in 1986. Pure music, unfiltered by cameras and journalists. Clapton recalled seeing her practice in high heels, as if she were a queen. Her actions were controlled and driven by a strong sense of purpose. Sitting backstage after the event, they traded scars. His vices, hers, and his passing eye. Respect for one another, no sympathy. The conversation between the two survivors is that of two battle veterans. They ran into each other frequently at festivals and business gatherings in the years that followed. While in Paris, Clapton was pleasantly surprised to see her at a banquet celebrating blues greats. Fear, pressure, and the innumerable instances that music had rescued them were the topics they discussed late into the night, rather than fame. She had self-control and perseverance, which he respected. Like an athlete, she trained like an army major while delivering a wonderful performance. She had previously confided in him that taking the stage was her idea of redemption. They had a subtle but profound bond of friendship. Their common language was the language of survival. She was more than just a musician to Clapton. She was ablaze. Form was her name. To be free was her. Previous to that, there existed an unparalleled voice, one that transformed music into poetry and elevated the sacredness of quiet. That was not blues, Joni Mitchell. Definitely not a rock star. Folks, she wasn't. Joni was her name. Joni doled out complexity in waves, which Clapton adored. She defies categorization with her intricate guitar tunings and cryptic lyrics. Few people realized how much she had an impact on him. They spent a weekend in Laurel Canyon in the mid to late 70s jamming out to vintage jazz albums and chatting about music. Half of her chord changes were cryptic, and Clapton admitted it. Joni chuckled and pretended to play an even crazier instrument. The discussion persisted even though they never worked together. He was taken aback by her unpredictable nature. He never forgot that weekend. All night long, they discussed every possible topic. A life lived through art, fear, addiction, and maturity. Despite Clapton's downturn, Joni's unflappable demeanor allowed her to see right through him. The woman made no effort to help him, took it all in. After what seemed like an eternity of stillness, she broke the spell by playing. He remembered how, seated on the floor, barefoot, engrossed in her own world, she sung a soft, incomplete tune. Even though he couldn't decipher the lyrics, they tore him to shreds. She was not giving him a performance, and she was being kind. Joni wasn't just a genre to Clapton. She was everything and more, and she showed us that the most profound things in music are often the ones you can't put your finger on. There was only one person who sprung to mind when thinking about unfiltered honesty clad in a leather jacket and eyeliner. Hi there. I am Chrissy Hind. Edge was revered by Clapton. For days, Chrissy was on edge. Without faking it, she was punk and rock. In the late 17s, the lead singer of the Pretenders came out with all her might, and Clapton found himself captivated. When they first crossed paths in 1981, it was at a BBC taping. She had been practicing. He sat quietly and observed. Later that evening, he wrote her a letter. To hear you speak is to hear the sound of integrity. That one she held on to. A subtle but enduring admiration was kindled by that meeting. In the conventional sense, they weren't close. Missed sessions and trips. However, they were connected in some way. At events or behind the scenes at festivals, their paths would occasionally intersect. No matter what, whenever Clapton played, she would stand in the wings. She dared the crowd, rather than trying to woo them, and he thought it was admirable. When they arrived in New York, they happened to sit next to each other at a memorial to Lou Reed. They had a few drinks and then got into an unguarded discussion about rock's current situation, legacy's weight, and the pressure to be authentic. Unflinchingly, Chrissy stated that she would prefer to be despised for her candor than adored for her nighttime antics. That stayed with him forever. Something about her voice, cold and biting on the surface, but with an aching heart, made him think of the purest form of the British blues scene. Clapton often claimed that the only thing worth plugging in for was truth, and she never wanted popularity, only truth. Lastly, among all the icons, a younger voice emerged, Susan Tedeschi, that was forceful, grounded, and already timeless. Not the least formidable, but the youngest of his candidates. Susan represented, in Clapton's eyes, a fresh wave of soul-soaked rock that paid homage to the past without emulating it. What about her guitar skills? Tough, expressive, and clean. Was that her voice? An ember that, if ignited, might bring down walls. Plus, she possessed honesty, which he knew couldn't be taught, which was the most important thing. They embarked on a joint tour in the early 2000s. Clapton was amazed by how modest she was. Susan was a master at commanding attention. She never once asked for it. They jammed with Derek Trucks and laughed like old friends for hours after the audience had departed from a Chicago gig one night. The uncensored stories delivered by her solos were something Clapton recalled. He would always remember that one night in Austin. There was a flurry of activity backstage after the encore, but Susan sat barefoot and played an acoustic gospel song in silence. Together, they took a seat and played guitars that spoke volumes that words alone could not convey. Careers and celebrity took a back seat at that moment. It was all about bonding, about the emotional language shared by the two musicians. She was not seeking compliments. She deserves it. According to Clapton, seeing her play brought back the feeling of why he began playing guitar. Not the sort of soul that yearned to be seen, but the kind that demanded to be felt. She returned to the stage with. The flame wasn't the only thing Susan carried. By illuminating her own way, she gained independence. The flames intensified with each performance, and Clapton could feel it. In his career, Eric Clapton has shared the stage alongside legendary musicians. However, he speaks of these women with utmost respect and no ego. It wasn't merely an influence. Lifelines, compass points, they were. They were all watershed moments that proved rawness and elegance could coexist. Singing wasn't all they did. They were serious. They spoke their minds even when it was unpopular, bleeding on stage as everyone else was putting on a show. Their music wasn't just background noise to Clapton. It was in his blood. It brought back memories of his past and his future. With nothing more than their voices and determination, these women carved out thunder in a world where rock was typically written by males. They skipped the permit phase. Space was not requested by them. They took it and then stuffed it with rebellion, intelligence, guts, and spirit. They weren't special in Clapton's eyes. Truth may be dressed in lipstick, leather, or nothing at all. They were the bedrock, the evidence that strength had many voices. All of them reverberate in his strings as he plays. He continues their legacy, not as homages, but as friends, in every solo, bend, and blues-soaked run. The women weren't merely performers. They were the very lifeblood of the music, in his opinion.